rained through her fingers. Page 81 to 90. It's time, miss. Elaine held the silvery thread between her fingers as Dobbs looped his fairy ring around his wrist. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the world wavered. Dobbs and Tom wavered with it, dissolving into mist. They were gone, leaving Elaine alone in the library. I told Ned I would go without him. Elaine rubbed her fingertips across the thin thread, but she had known since making the empty threat, what she would do. Elaine placed the fairy ring in her pocket, next to the tears. Ned had not expected to be burdened with a girl and a cat when he came to Brighton to steal the king's abandoned treasures. Yet he'd taken care of both Elaine and Tom. She couldn't leave him behind, even if it meant facing Davy Hatchett again. Standing in the darkened attic, Elaine unwrapped the biscuits. The paper was oily with magic. The charm to keep out moisture and pests tingled. Elaine ate one, slowly and carefully, savoring every bite. The other she kept for when she saw Ned again, one way or another. This was her last day in Brighton. A cup of tea would have improved the repast, but this would have to do as a farewell feast. Then she gathered her courage, trod down the winding stairway, splashed to the lighter darkness of the front door, and stepped into the open. It didn't take long for the fairy creatures to notice her, but Elaine didn't cringe or cower or pay them any heed. Head held high, she picked her way through the mess that was the Stein. Footsteps arrowed towards the pavilion. Dead and dying fish lay in the mud, along with bones, broken glass, driftwood, and, here and there, a glitter of metal. Perhaps a quiet, desperate determination confused them, for the imps hung back as they followed her, their muttering a backdrop to her silent walk. Halfway to the pavilion, water condensed on her skin, dampening her clothes. Droplets clung to her hair and eyelashes. A watery world wobbled all around her. Elaine blinked, and it was gone. The pavilion was a misty fantasy of domes and minarets, prickled all over with lights. Strange magic crept around Elaine, touching her with ghostly fingers. She caught snatches of eerie song, flashes of incomprehensible sights, scents that made her ache for things she had never seen. Water trickled down her scalp and neck. Its familiar clamminess was both a barrier to fairy enchantment and a comfort in her fear. The Ichushka, now a man, waited at the entrance of the octagon hall. His black eyes burned with ever-smoldering fire. His hair was entwined with a festive wreath of sirach. Elaine's gaze flickered over him, but his scrutiny of her was more intense. A wild laughter came over his face. He stepped aside and sketched a mocking bow. Somehow that gesture gave her the courage to enter the pavilion. For the next half of an hour, she could pretend that she was a visiting dignitary, someone who belonged in royal palaces, someone who could stand face to face with the King of Brighton. 100 cents of rot, of fish and brine, assailed Elaine. For one unsteady moment, she thought she would cast up her accounts. But then she inhaled the scent of spring rain, and the moment passed. The pavilion was a gorgeous, gaudy wreck. Elaine lifted her sodden skirts from the rotted carpet, as she crossed the entrance hall, to the long gallery. Glitters of glass and china showed where fine, fragile things had been smashed in the deluge and its aftermath. Marsh lights gleamed against the ceiling above, casting an eerie light over everything. Around Elaine, the humid air cooled. Tiny droplets misted to life all around her. By the time she entered the long gallery, a soft rain had begun to fall. Livid mold spread black and green across pink walls, once graced with delicate traceries of trees and birds. The extravagant furnishings were in ruins, mirrors broken, chairs in pieces, urns and other delicate china smashed upon the floor. The gallery was filled with fairies, imps carrying serving platters, sea people with scaly skin and spears, hobgoblins capering to the music of bone flutes. They turned and looked at her, but no one stopped her. Elaine hesitated briefly, questing with her magic. There, that familiar tang of iron. She turned right, towards the banqueting room. Of course, he would choose the most magnificent of chambers to hold court, Rain announced Elaine as she stopped in the doorway that led into the banqueting room. Despite herself, her gaze went up to the domed ceiling, where a silver dragon still held the massive chandelier between its claws. Even the lotus-shaped lamps, each with its attendant dragon, had survived the depredations of sea infamy magic. Glass drops fell in curtains from the silver and gilt framework. It now burned with an odd light, the color of fish scales. Elaine looked past the banks of windows covered in stained draperies, down the long pulpy mass of Axminster carpet, over the mix of fairy and human courtiers, if they could be called that, and down to the end where, in front of the marble fireplace, Davy Hatchet lounged in a chair made from bones. To the left, wrapped in chains and forced to kneel on the soggy floor covering, was Ned. Elaine's heart slammed into her ribcage, and she didn't know whether it was at the sight of the self-styled King of Brighton, or the roguish rune thief, or even both. Her pause was only momentary. Lifting her chin and her skirts, she swept down the long room, devoid of other furniture. Davy, apparently, did not invite his subjects to feast with him in this room. Gibbers and whispers from the fairy creatures followed her. The few humans watched with eyes long past the point of fear and exhaustion, dulled to despair. None of them was Lydia. Two blue-skinned men with white beards stood guard near Davy, each with a spear in his hands. They moved to intercept her, but Davy, his gaze locked on hers, waved them off. "Let her come," he said, in a rasp voice, as if he, too, had corroded under water. Ned stiffened, craned his neck. Elaine glanced at him. Shock filled his eyes. His mouth shaped the word flee. She gave a minute shake of her head. "So," said Davy, with a laugh that was almost a choke, "the storm stirred up another rat. I did not think you would have the courage to come to my pavilion, cousin." "I've changed," Elaine said, keeping her tone even. She measured him with her eyes. "And so have you." Indeed, there was little of the prosperous industrialist she had once known. An unhealthy pallor lay on his skin, which in turn was stretched upon his large frame. He had lost mass, and quickly, too. His hair was stringy and his face unshaven, but his eyes held a feverish glitter that was all malice. It was as if all his hatred had distilled to 2 points of dark light. Davy's bloodless lips stretched back from shockingly blackened gums. "You thought you had seen the last of me, eh? But even in the depths of the sea, in Eron, I prevailed. Behold my court, behold my subjects." He gestured with one skeletal hand. With varying degrees of grace, his motley court dropped into bows and curtsies. Some of the imps even had their faces pressed into the waterlogged carpet. A flicker of distaste must have shown on her face, because Davy's smile dropped, becoming pure snarl. He yanked at a chain that led from his throne of bones and into a hip bath to the right. "Make obeisance to your master, you wench." Water sloshed over the sides as a mermaid emerged, her head crooked at an uncomfortable angle. An iron collar surrounded her neck. Her long, fluttery, webbed fingers danced around it without ever touching it. Blank horror filmed her sea-gray eyes. The mermaid made a strangled sound as she was pulled nearly out of the tub. Her scaly tail thrashed the water in a frenzy of agitation. "Stop!" cried Elaine, sure the creature would spill gasping onto the floor, but Davy had already loosened his grip. The mermaid slipped back into the water with a plop. "She sings most beautifully," Davy explained. "I should hate to deprive myself of her voice. Her power, you mean, without which none of this would have been possible." Elaine's small gesture took in the entirety of Brighton. Davy's eyes narrowed. "You grow bold, Elaine," he said softly. "You were always such a mouse, creeping about, speaking under your breath." Yet, you are here, in my domain. Have you learnt wisdom yet? Have you come to bestow Mary Morgan's tears to their rightful master? I think it's time to settle the matter. Yes, said Elaine, but the tears belong to the best magician. The next words nearly stuck in her throat. With difficulty she forced them out. I challenge you to a magician's duel. Davy's mouth dropped open. A wheezing sound emerged. His whole frame shook. For a second, Elaine thought he was having a fit. No, he was laughing. She felt like a fool. 100 times over. Instinctively, her eyes lowered, her shoulders hunched, her head bowed. Then she caught sight of Ned. His gaze was direct and steady, encouraging. Not a word passed his lips, but she could feel his support. No one had ever believed in her like that, not even her mother, to whom Elaine had always been a child to coddle and protect. Elaine straightened her back, raised her eyes, lifted up her head. "Are you afraid, Davy?" she asked coldly. The fine drizzle around them became harder rain, hissing through the air. "I'm sorry about the cold, Ned. Please bear with it a little longer." His manacled hands were chained behind his back and to cuffs around his ankles. He was already shivering, as were the other human members of the court. None of the fairies were affected. "Of you?" Davy scoffed. "Never. You won the last round with a weak, womanish trick. It won't happen again." He rose to his feet, spread out his hands. "For see, I now have the advantage of you. My will survived the black depths, and I took control of the undersea kingdoms. Now both iron and saltwater obey me. How can you stand against them?" He stepped forward, his movements jerky, like that of a puppet on strings. Live iron chains slithered down from his wrists, his shoulders, his waist. Some anchored him to the bone chair, others led to his two captives. Still others trailed like tentacles and clattered across the floor. These last came alive with a hiss and clank. Panic bubbled up again in Elaine, the panic of a girl huddled at the bottom of a rowboat under a night sky, with the sea dark and fathomless around her and the moon staring down like a baleful eye. He'd meant to hurl her into the sea with those irons once. With her dead, the enchantment in the vial would have to accept him as master. Never. Elaine's hand stole into her pocket, clenched around the tears for its strength, then she withdrew it and said, "Then let's lay out the terms. Davy, if I lose, the tears are yours, but, if I win," she paused, "then you and your minions withdraw from Brighton without harming anyone and return to your underwater kingdom." Davy let out a scoffing breath of air. Done. He didn't believe she could win. Oh, to have his superior confidence, but then he'd always thought her the weak daughter of a strong mother. He'd made his scorn clear, first in hair pulls and pinches, then in jeers and laughs over the years. He'd made up to Mama, blinding her with his charm and strength. His own mother, Elaine's aunt, was a faded non-entity. No doubt he'd thought Elaine would end up just like her. "But Mama entrusted the tears to me." The Ichushka came forward and bowed with languid grace. "If you would allow me to begin the duel, Your Majesty." Subtle mocking was in every line of him. Elaine, sensitive to slight, stiffened, but Davy was oblivious. "Of course." He waved his hand. All too soon, the imp swept away the debris. Davy's courtiers jostled for a clear view, and the Ichushka positioned the duelists to his satisfaction.